What is an appraisal? What does it mean in a real estate transaction in New Jersey? And why is it important? An appraisal is a written description of a property and an estimate of its value. Appraisals are important in many situations, including loan financing, property assessment for tax purposes, and sale or purchase negotiations. In a typical real estate transaction involving financing in New Jersey, the appraisal is the estimated market value as stipulated currently for a piece of property. Typically, it is an appraiser who determines this value on the basis of all the comparables that's sold in your community. In my experience, when I represent buyers in New Jersey, the appraisal comes in sometime between the inspection period and the closing. It is a very important piece of information that's crucial, actually one of the steps that could make your deal fall through. Why? When the appraisal comes in too low, meaning the appraiser appraised the property under the purchase price, we have a problem. So basically 4 things can happen when the house under appraises. 1, the buyer might come up with extra money to cover the appraisal gap. The money has to come out of pocket, and this is in addition to their closing costs and down payment. Number 2, the seller might go down in the price, lowering their purchase price to the appraised value. Number 3, they can meet somewhere in the middle, meaning the buyer puts out a little bit of money out of pocket and the seller comes down a little bit from the purchase price. And 4, they don't agree on anything. The buyer doesn't want to come up with extra money and the seller doesn't want to go down. They don't want to meet in the middle. Then the deal might fall through with no financial or legal consequences on either side, right? Unless it was otherwise stipulated during the attorney review period or put in the contract in the original offer. Appraisals are also very useful and necessary actually in New Jersey. Not always, but most of the time they are necessary when you are refinancing your home. Refinancing process is very similar to a purchase process. So one of the steps to be taken is for the bank to send an appraiser to appraise the property. And it has to appraise for the purchase price of the refinance amount of money. How much money does it cost to do an appraisal? Well, in the process of the home purchase in New Jersey, let's say you are a buyer, it can vary from $500 to $1,000. It depends on the bank, and it's a very individual case. However, it's actually included in your closing costs because you have your down payment and you have your closing costs. Closing costs in New Jersey are typically between 3 to 4% of the purchase price of the property, and that amount of the appraisal fee is included in those closing costs. Let me give you an example. I always like to give examples and real numbers because I think it makes people understand the situation better. It's more straightforward and I think most people can relate. So let's talk about the underappraised value of a home. Let's say you are purchasing a home for $500,000. The appraiser comes and says, I don't think this home is worth, on basis of the comparables in the area, I don't think this home is worth more than $450,000. So now the purchase price that you agreed on with the seller is $500,000 and the appraised value is $450,000. What happens? Somebody has to cover the difference of $50,000, right? This money has to come up from somewhere, and it can happen in 2 ways. Either the seller comes down with the price, so he comes down from $500,000 to $450,000. So basically they lose $50,000 because that's not what they agreed upon, right? They accepted an offer of $500,000 and that's what they were counting on, right? But in this case, either they have to go down with the price, $50,000 down, or the buyer can come up out of pocket with extra $50,000. In addition to the closing costs, in addition to the down payment, they would have to come up with extra $50,000. It's a really tough situations for people, right? Or there is another scenario where the seller goes down 25,000 and the buyer comes up with extra 25,000, and that way they meet somewhere in the middle, right? So then the purchase price would be 475 instead of 500, but still it's better to keep the deal because there is a chance when another buyer comes in and another appraiser comes in, there is a chance that the house is not going to appraise at 500 again. So it's always better to negotiate, and that way keep the deal and make it happen.